Do you know the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. When the student is truly ready, the teacher will disappear. There's a quiet wisdom hidden in that line, one you only begin to understand once you've lived it, not just heard it. Because at the beginning of every search, whether spiritual, emotional, or personal, we often feel like we need someone who already knows. Someone to guide us, to give us answers. A mentor, a book, a YouTube video, a coach, a loved one. And often such a figure does appear, not always in the way we expect, but at the right time, when we're internally ripe enough to receive something we weren't ready to see before. But that's only the first layer. The deeper truth doesn't reveal itself right away. It comes later, after repetition, after confusion, after pain, after growth. Because that teacher, whether they're a person or a situation, tends to linger, not because you don't understand yet, but because you haven't embodied the understanding. Only when you fully grasp what that person or experience has shown you about yourself does something shift at the root. And then something strange happens. The teacher disappears. Not always in the literal sense, but their influence, their place in your awareness, the grip they once had on your attention, dissolves. The conflict is gone. The need for their approval fades. And suddenly you realize you don't need them anymore. You're no longer the student seeking answers. You are the answer. And that moment, it's not always a celebration. It's often something quiet. You only notice it later, looking back and realizing how far you've come. What many call coincidence in life, constantly attracting the same types of people, the same conflicts, the same disappointments, is rarely coincidence at all. It's the repetition of an inner script. Life shows up as a mirror, like a living classroom. And every time you don't yet grasp the lesson, or don't yet dare to feel what needs to be felt, you stay in that classroom. It feels like being trapped in a pattern, like the universe is working against you. But that's not what's happening. The universe is actually working for you, bringing everything that's still unconscious in you to the surface, again and again. These cycles, where you keep encountering the same emotions, reactions, and triggers, aren't punishment. They're invitations to know yourself, to observe yourself, and ultimately to transform yourself. And if you take that invitation seriously, not in theory, but in action, your frequency shifts, not because you said an affirmation or held a crystal, but because you integrated something real. It mirrors your frequency, your beliefs, even the ones you didn't know you had, until you finally learn to see them and choose to emit something else. That's where many people get it wrong about the law of attraction. They think it's mostly about wanting, about wishing and attracting what you desire, but it works much more subtly than that. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are, what you believe, what you feel, what you allow. And then comes that moment of recognition. The situation might still be there, maybe even the person, but it no longer shakes you. You don't react the way you used to. There's no struggle, no urge to prove, no inner resistance. You're at peace with something that once held you hostage. And what you start to notice is that they become invisible. They may still exist, but they don't enter your world anymore. You cross paths, but it's like walking past a stranger, as if the thread that once tied you together has silently come undone. That's the disappearance of the teacher, not because they've changed, but because you have shifted. And that is how the law of attraction truly works. Life doesn't reward effort. It reflects who you are in this moment. So yes, when you're truly ready, when you don't just understand the lesson, but actually live it, the teacher disappears, not out of anger, but because their role is complete. The law of attraction doesn't just play out in dramatic life events or deep spiritual awakenings. It reveals itself constantly, even in something as simple as communication. You feel it when you try to share something important with someone, an insight, an experience, a truth that's alive in you, and they just don't seem to receive it. Sometimes it even feels like life steps in. Their phone rings, someone interrupts, their focus drifts to something shallow, as if life itself says, "Not now." And while that can be frustrating, it often reflects something deeper. The other person is not a receiver in that moment. You can only transmit if someone is tuned in to receive. Not every message, no matter how true or sincere, can land in a consciousness that isn't ready. You can compare it to a sequence of numbers. Imagine numbers 1 through 10, but someone is missing number 7. No matter how clearly you explain number 8, it won't make sense. It won't resonate. Not because you're wrong, but because the structure to hold it isn't there. It's just like a radio signal. If you're broadcasting on 97.3 and they're tuned to 88.7, They won't hear you clearly. Maybe not at all. And that's not personal. It has everything to do with where someone is in their journey, what they're focused on, and what beliefs and experiences shape their perception of reality. What we often overlook is that this tuning doesn't just happen between sender and receiver. It also happens within you. Because if you've experienced your message being rejected, misunderstood, or even ridiculed, something subtle begins to develop, a form of self-censorship. Not out of fear, but out of insight. You start sensing more clearly who you can speak deeply with, and when it's better to wait. Not because you're playing small, but because you're learning how energy moves. And when it makes sense to speak at all, that's not hesitation. That's mastery. Because even this has a cycle. Again and again, you try to share your truth, maybe with hope, maybe with excitement. And again, you're faced with what lands and what doesn't. Until one day you realize, it's not about whether you speak well enough, but whether there's space for your words to be received. And with that realization, a natural kind of intelligence awakens. You begin to recognize who can actually resonate with your frequency. You learn to feel where you can be yourself effortlessly and where you'd only be broadcasting into emptiness. You learn the difference between speaking and truly connecting. And the less you try to be heard, the more you're noticed. But only by those who are truly open at that moment. This also changes how you see others. No longer as people who don't get it, but as consciousness still unfolding, just like you. And you stop planting seeds in soil that's not yet ready to receive. You wait until the earth softens, because a message can only grow if the consciousness of the other can make space for it. And that's the real law of attraction. Not just attracting what you desire, but resonating with those who can actually meet you. Once you begin to understand that energy only flows where it can be received, you start to notice something that's deeply connected to that. It all starts with a question, not necessarily a spoken one, not always clearly formed, but a felt one, an inner pull, a curiosity so real that it begins shaping your entire path. In The Matrix, Morpheus says to Neo, "It's the question that drives us. It's the question that brought you here." And that's not just a movie line. It's a reflection of how life actually works. Because before you choose a direction, before you make a decision, there is always first the question. The question is the gateway. You could say that every journey in life begins with an inner momentum, a desire to know, to understand, to feel, to break out of something that has become too small. The strength of that question determines the path that opens. The more energy behind your question, the more powerful the path that forms. Sometimes it's unconscious. Maybe you didn't ask deep philosophical questions about the meaning of life, but you did wonder why school felt empty, why you didn't fit in, why your parents acted the way they did, or why you felt different from the people around you. And without even realizing it, that question became your guide. It pulled you away from the surface and drew you into experiences that opened you further. What many people don't realize is that this same mechanism is used by forces outside of us. The questions that get activated within us, through our upbringing, through media, advertising, religion, and education, shape the paths we follow as a society. It's no coincidence that millions of people wear the same clothes, chase the same ideals, and face the same struggles. These aren't real choices. They're planted questions. Questions like, how do I become successful? What do others think of me? Or, am I normal? They may sound innocent, but they steer people every single day toward the same stores, the same habits of thought, the same versions of identity. That's how you create a nation of individuals who believe they're choosing, while in reality, they're simply following what was once quietly inserted into their mind. But then, at some point, a different kind of question arises. One that doesn't come from the outside, but from something much quieter. A flash of insight, a moment of wonder, or a pain that no longer wants to be ignored. Sometimes it's an awkward question, one you used to avoid because you assumed the answer was too far away, or because it felt like too much, too big, too vague. But now here you are. You're older, you're more aware, you're beginning to see the effects of the questions you never asked yourself. You feel it in your body, in the fatigue, in the emptiness. It's as if your system is quietly trying to tell you, you've lost your way because you forgot your question. Because the question isn't just the direction. The question is the path. And when you allow yourself to start asking again, really asking, without shame or self-censorship, something begins to open. It's not always an answer that comes first, but a shift, a movement. And that movement is life. What stays with me is that scene from The Matrix where Morpheus says, "It's the question that drives us. It's the question that brought you here." It sounds like such a simple moment, But there's something deeply universal hidden in that line. Because how did it begin for you? Not with an answer, not with a clear path, but with a question. Sometimes the question is vague, sometimes almost forbidden, but it's alive. Maybe it started small. Why do I feel different here? Why does everything around me seem fake? Why am I not happy, even though I should be? Or maybe it was a bigger one. What is all this? Why do I exist? Why does life hurt even when things seem to be going well? Whatever it was, that question pulled you away from the crowd. You started to see with different eyes, not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't help it. And from that moment, something started moving. Not always visible, not fast, but irreversible. The question opened something in you, a space, a kind of openness that made you begin to attract different things. Different books, different people, different conflicts even, as if the question became the gate your experiences pass through. And that's how it works. Not just spiritually, but literally. The question you carry inside determines what you attune to, where your attention moves, what you notice, what you miss. The question isn't just a thought, it's a magnetic field. And the more energy you give it, the more your reality forms around it. That's why questions are the most powerful tool of influence. Not the answers, but the questions. The direction of your attention. And this isn't some mystical idea. It's the foundation of psychological conditioning, of propaganda, of commercial strategy. It's no secret, but it's rarely acknowledged. You don't need to convince people. You only need to make them ask the right question. And it happens subtly, repeatedly, through advertising, movies, news, education. From an early age, we're not just taught how to think, but what to think about. And if you can shape where someone puts their attention, you control their perception, their world, their choices. That's why entire generations, without ever coordinating, end up valuing the same things, having the same fears, chasing the same shallow dreams. It feels like we're speaking the same language, but it goes deeper than that. It's about following the same mental paths, as if someone laid down the tracks for us before we even started walking. Not because we're truly the same, but because we've been carrying the same questions for years, questions we never chose ourselves. Take a look at cultural groups, subcultures, or national identities. People with completely different personalities and backgrounds suddenly like the same music, wear similar clothes, use the same gestures, slang, humor. It might seem like a matter of taste, but in reality, it's the echo of an unconscious question. Who am I, and where do I belong? And that question is rarely answered individually. We identify with a group not because we have to, but because it feels safe, because belonging means your existence is validated. So we start behaving like the group, not because it always fits, but because we've learned that standing out is risky. Rejection, exclusion, misunderstanding. And so we begin copying the way we speak, how we hold ourselves, how we dress, what we believe, not always consciously, not even because we want to, but because we are human, and humans seek connection. Before you know it, you've become someone, without ever having chosen who that is. You are who you think you're supposed to be, and that thought was shaped long before you ever became conscious of it. But that also means you can reclaim it. You can free yourself from the idea that you are a fixed identity, because identity, as real as it may feel, is often the result of what once seemed necessary just to belong somewhere. Only when you dare to ask the question again, is this truly who I am? Does something begin to shift? And then you realize that much of what you called me was actually a reaction, a reflex, a mirror, but not your essence. And right there lies the core of your growth. Life doesn't change just by knowing more. It changes when you begin to ask different questions. The questions you're willing to sit with, the ones you don't run from. Those are what ultimately shape your reality, not just internally. You start attracting experiences that resonate with that question. It's not a coincidence. It's the law of alignment. Whoever remembers their question, remembers their path. If you've come this far, chances are you're someone who has played small for years. Maybe out of caution, maybe for protection, maybe because you sensed the world around you wasn't ready for the full strength of what you carry inside. But let me say something not mentioned enough on this path. People often say, falling into the rabbit hole, as if it's something you disappear into and can't escape from. But what if you looked at it differently? You don't have to fall into it. You can climb it, not like a trap, but like a spiral, a path upward, as long as you keep your direction, your focus, your inner anchor. Because even when you think you've come a long way, you can suddenly be caught off guard. Not because you've regressed, but because the ego is both a clever ally and a subtle opponent. Old wounds you thought were healed suddenly resurface. Old addictions whisper to you again, not to test you, but to see if you're truly free or just resting in between. The cycle may have softened. Less urgent, less frequent. But it's still there. Not as punishment, but as an echo of what once resonated deeply in you. Triggers can be small. An unexpected comment, a sharp look, a social media post where someone projects their bitterness or anger. And suddenly you feel it. A charge in your body, an impulse to react, to correct, to defend. But if you look deeper, you'll see something else. You're being invited, not into conversation, into their world. Because what people try to make you feel is often just a reflection of their inner world. Pain, looking for a way out, through you. And when you understand that, the entire dynamic shifts. You are no longer the target. You become the mirror. And in that role lies a responsibility. Not to strike back, but to see through it. And in that seeing, something shifts. You pull your energy out of the script. What once triggered you becomes a chance to strengthen your awareness. But even that moves in waves. And for that, you need to recognize the rhythm. It's not a relapse. It's a movement. A breath from something that once lived deep inside you. Imagine it as a field breathing around your consciousness. In the beginning, it's tight, compact, right on your skin. Every trigger, every echo feels like it takes over your entire system. But the more often you see through it, the less you react. And the wider the field becomes. It exhales. It pulls back. The cycle grows, not because it disappears, but because you no longer live inside it. Still, it keeps moving. And now and then, when you're tired, distracted, or touched by something old in you, the field comes closer again, as if it inhales. And for a moment, that old frequency brushes up against you. It feels familiar, but what happens next is up to you. If you react, it stays small. It tightens again. It becomes your rhythm once more. But if you let it pass, if you recognize it and let it breathe out without stepping in, then it expands again. It returns to that spacious orbit. And every time you do that, you breathe yourself further out. It's not the cycle that keeps you trapped. It's your response that decides whether you remain inside it. So you keep breathing, wider, deeper, until even the backlash moves nothing in you. Until it becomes just a quiet echo, a memory of where you once were and how far you've come. In a time where distraction has become the norm and focus feels like a burden, I want to say something to you. The one who stayed until the very end. If you watch this all the way through, then you are part of that rare group who still knows how to sit, feel, and truly listen. You are one of them. Let me know in the comments with the word dedication, and feel free to share your own view, your experience, or what this touched within you. I see you, and I respect you.